Hey there riders, Journo Kris here today, and I've got the Suzuki GSX-R1000R from MotoHUB in Castle Hill. This is their demo bike, so it is available to test ride and it is available for sale at this point in time. And I thought I'd give a quick comparison of my overall thoughts between the Superbike and the more road-orientated GSX-S1000 that I rode a couple of weeks ago. Now, I will say the family resemblance between these two bikes is actually really strong. As far as handling, they both have a very stable handling feel to them, which is really nice. And having ridden the Hayabusa as well, it feels like a very Suzuki characteristic across all of their bikes. Now also there is a very strong resemblance between the engine. Obviously the GSX-S has that old K5 engine in it. However, the VVT inline 4 in the latest GSX-R1000 is very much cut from the same cloth, and they're both really nice power plants. I thought the GSX-S had an absolutely stunning intake cowl to it, and it was just such a fun thing to rev, even in that lower rev range where you're mainly going to be for your road riding. However, the GSX-R takes that to a whole nother level, and it just has the most intoxicating exhaust and intake growl, which does make it a super rewarding thing to ride. It's got the high-end brakes as well. It's got the higher-end suspension from Showa, as you can probably see here, because it is the R model, which steps it up from the regular GSX-R1000. And as a result, this is kind of the top-end superbike from Suzuki. And for all that the GSX-R has the higher spec kind of features fitted to it as far as those forks and the shock and the brakes, I personally preferred the more supple suspension setup and the more basic setup found on the GSX-S because the comfort was so good, and I could still push fairly hard and have a lot of fun on it, but the comfort side of things was really important. On this bike, being a super bike and very track orientated, the suspension was just way too harsh for the rougher roads out of Sydney, and that was very punishing the vast majority of the time, and as a result of that it was harder to enjoy the bike. Now, whether you could tune the fully adjustable suspension on this to be soft enough to really offer a nice comfortable ride, that's probably possible, but certainly out of the box it was a much more punishing and a much more hardcore machine, which is what a super bike is, and that detracted from my experience on the bike from a road rider perspective. Where the roads were really good, certainly this bike had the edge over the GSX-S simply because it was a little bit more flickable and the power was ridiculous even compared to the GSX-S, which I would say had plenty, and this bike there really shone. However, I would say over the overall experience of all the road conditions, the GSX-S was the clear winner. It was more comfortable, it's about 10 grand cheaper, it's a fun thing to ride, it's got the upright ergonomics, unlike this which has the full sports bike ergonomics. As a result of that, you feel like you're going faster at lower speeds, so you can enjoy kind of a more, in some ways, mundane ride at more legal speeds, where on this you really have to push well past any legal speeds most of the time to really get that thrill factor. And again, that's one of my complaints about the sports bikes, in that sure, they're awesome machines, but really for today's roads it's very hard to take advantage of that and to do it in a responsible way, where in comparison, if we look at something like the GSX-S, which still has way more power than you'll ever need, you can really take advantage of that at the lower RPMs and lower speeds and feel like you're having the thrills, where on this you're breaking the speed limits normally to get the thrills really going at the same level. So as I mentioned, on this bike you've got a very tight seat to peg ratio, and then of course you've got the drop down bars, which does not really lend itself to road riding in general conditions. It lends itself to really nice twisties and stuff like that, but when you're riding in very mixed conditions, I find the sports bike ergo a bit more punishing, and when you add the really harsh suspension, it is kind of a match made in hell, and the bike will be something that some people will jump onto and go, wow, I could never ride one of those daily. However, I think if the suspension was set up right on the GSX-R, it would certainly be just as viable an everyday machine, even if I think you'd find yourself having to restrain how much of the performance you use at a much greater level than you would on something like the GSX-S. A couple of other points of note is that obviously there's an IMU in the GSX-R, so that is an upgrade over the GSX-S, not one that I'd probably say really justifies a 10k or 9k difference between the two bikes, but that is a subjective judgment call as to what you want on the bike. The ride modes do make a good difference, as they did on the GSX-S. Fueling is good, really nicely set up, quite a simple system through the dash as well, and a simple dash, which again I have no problem with, but no TFT, so whether you're happy with that or not is going to be another thing entirely. You do get the wind protection, you got good vision through those mirrors. However, I'd take the GSX-S with the no wind protection and the more upright ergonomics any day of the week. And this has this fairly large exhaust on it, which is quite the bread box. However, surprisingly enough, this thing has got a really nice sound to it, which actually does, I think, kind of take the bike to another level. And that's something that I really look for. Obviously not everyone's going to like it, but when you start this thing up, man, it's just so good. And the same is true of the GSX-S, but this takes it to another level. So really impressed with that. So which of these two bikes would I pick? Well, it's a really simple answer to that one. I would take the GSX-S1000 any day of the week. It is a cheaper machine. It's 17.3 versus 26.5. I think the level of performance, the suspension, the brakes on that bike are more than enough. I think the more upright kind of seating position on that bike is the winner personally, but that's going to be a subjective kind of area. Certainly the two bikes, there's a lot of kind of characteristics which are common between the two. However, the supple suspension again on the GSX-S was a real winner for me, and on the GSX-R1000R, the harsh suspension really killed it for me. And it's not to say that I couldn't work with it. However, I don't tend to think of super sport bikes and super bikes and full-on sports bikes the way I used to when I was a little bit younger. These days, I just prefer the upright ergo, the more comfort kind of derived bikes, and I'm happy to do without the extra performance, the extra electronics and things like that, and just have a bike which, while it's not kind of a super duper machine, it is unbelievable value. And I think for kind of the dollars spent, for the thrills you'll get, that's always going to be the winner. If I was riding primarily on the track, obviously the GSX-R1000R would be the clear winner, and you really couldn't argue with that. However, that's not the case, and I think for a lot of people who may be thinking, you know, how do I justify spending the extra money? There's a lot of subjective kind of judgment calls you're going to need to make between the two bikes, but for bang for buck, the GSX-S1000 is a clear winner for me, and I would take that to the track day for, you know, a track day once or twice a year without any issues whatsoever, and I reckon I'd have more fun on that anyway, even though this is clearly the track weapon and the better track bike. Anyway, let me know what you think between the GSX-R1000 or the 1000R, either of those two models, or the GSX-S1000, the road going naked, the Roadster. Which of those two bikes do you prefer? What do you think of Suzuki leaving MotoGP, and of course the Suzuki GSX-R1000 and the R both kind of disappearing in Europe from next year because of the emissions, unless we see Suzuki really pull something out of the hat, which I can't see happening alongside kind of jumping out of MotoGP. Let me know your thoughts. As always, stay safe out there. Thanks for watching and have a good one.